Good morning, Ohio State fans, and happy Labor Day on Monday, September 1st, 2025. This is the first 11 Dubcast of the Ohio State football season, and it is starting off on a very good note, not just because I'm joined by our lead producer, Chase Brown. Chase, you were at the game. It was a successful day for Ohio State. Great way to start the season, 14-7 win. How are you feeling after the win? How are you feeling generally?
Yeah, I thought it was a great game obviously to be there is an incredible experience. I thought the atmosphere at Ohio Stadium, both around the stadium, during the game, after the game, was incredible. I thought that the atmosphere, especially considering College Game Day's presence with Lee Corso and it being his final show, was something that had energy from about 8 or 9 a.m. up until kickoff. And then from there, you obviously are watching Ohio State football for the first time since January 20th. So that's going to get the fans energized. Not to mention they're playing the number one team in the country. And no, yeah, Arch Manning is their quarterback. There's a Manning on the field. So much going into the game had everyone excited. And I think that obviously with Ohio State coming away with a win, that's going to excite some people. So I think all things considered, Ohio State had a great day yesterday, on Saturday. And I do think that people are going to come away happy with everything that occurred.
Yeah, I think unless you're, strictly a Texas fan, even if you're one of those people that subscribes to the theory that it's Ohio against the world and you're in the camp that is the world, that is anybody that isn't an Ohio State fan doesn't like Ohio State. I don't know how you could come away from yesterday, at least the first game, not feeling like that was just a feel good experience for all of college football. And most of it, the stage was set by, the Lee Corso send off and just all the feel good vibes around that. And I think that given, some of the more uncomfortable moments that he has had on TV last season and maybe in recent seasons, which kind of facilitated why it was kind of time for him to step away. I don't think it could have gone any smoother, not just because he picked the correct team to win, or that he picked Florida State to beat Alabama, or that he picked LSU to win the national championship and they ended up upsetting Clemson. But it was just a feel-good day all around, I think. It was cool to see Ryan Day give him that Buckeye helmet
Yeah.
within the first hour of game day, I think. And it was a nice touch giving him that little extra helmet sticker, like in case you need it later. And he definitely did. And it all went very smoothly. The game was, I wouldn't call it smooth. I think it probably defied a lot of people's expectations. I was personally, I was stunned when I saw that, especially after Ohio State's defense last season, that the point total, I think, opened around like 51 or something. It kind of dropped into 47 over the course of the week, but I was firmly expecting a low scoring game similar to when these two teams met last time, and it did play out in that fashion. Of course, I was one of the three people on staff that picked Ohio State to lose, which I am now 0 for my last three in terms of picking Ohio State when they play the number one team in the country. So, but however, I did tie for second best scoring prediction on staff because I went with that low point total. So I have that to feel good about at least. But
Yeah.
I think I still think by and large, if you're an Ohio State fan, there were a lot of things that kind of went as you expected, but some things that didn't go as expected. I have my own main thing that really stood out to me in terms of what shocked me from the game overall, but I'm curious, what surprised you the most relative to what your expectations were going into this game?
I think honestly, just how Ohio State's defense looked. This is a team really that lost 14 NFL draft picks from last season, including another three who were signed to undrafted free agent contracts, and Seth McLaughlin and G. Scott and Josh Fryer. The defense lost 8 or 9 starters from last season's team. They bring back Davison Igbinosun, Sonny Styles, some contributors like Caleb Downs, and he's another starter, but some contributors like Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson, Jermaine Matthews Jr. So it was familiar faces, but not necessarily a ton of guys who came back with a ton of experience. And then add to that you have a first-year defensive coordinator, a first-time college defensive coordinator, and Matt Patricia, whose last time coaching wasn't particularly great. I think a lot of people remember his time as a Super Bowl champion defensive coordinator for the New England Patriots, but then they also know too kind of the failures that he had as a Detroit Lions head coach. So mixed within all of that is he going to be a defensive coordinator that can have success at the college level? Is he going to be able to create a game plan quick enough that's going to be able to neutralize the number one team? But that defense looked incredible on Saturday. For them to shut down Arch Manning, for them to shut down the Texas offense as well as they did, to deploy Arbel Reese in some of the ways where he was close to the line of scrimmage. He's playing middle linebacker. He's dropping back in coverage. But then, oh, yeah, he's also delayed blitzing and getting to the quarterback and getting Ohio State's only sack of the game. Davis Igbinosun led the team with 10 tackles. Jermaine Matthews Jr. gets an interception. Caleb Downs is Caleb Downs. You know, that defense just looked incredible. And I can't say enough good things about the way that Matt Patricia schemed up the game to keep Arch Manning confused and to keep that Texas offense from scoring any more than 7 points in the season opener. It was a masterclass performance from Patricia.
Yeah, it definitely was, I think, one of the more surprising things, not necessarily that Patricia had success, but that the transition from Jim Knowles to Patricia, you would have thought that there would have been at least a little bit of growing pains, particularly given the quality of opponent they're getting in the first go of the season. And it seems like the transition went absolutely seamlessly. They were pitching a shutout for most of the game, and you hesitate to call the touchdown that Texas scored a garbage time touchdown because it made it a one-score game late, but they had almost all of their offensive success came within probably the last half of the fourth quarter and maybe even a smaller window than that. So it was certainly an encouraging step forward, and I think absolutely the main reason that they won the game. But the biggest thing that I think shocked me relative to my expectations, I part of the reason I picked Texas was because I had bought into the line of thinking that I think a lot of people, Ohio State fan or just college football fan generally had from preseason expectations, that Texas had probably the best front seven in college football this year, especially the most talented and deepest rotation on the defensive line. And for Ohio State to not give up a single sack to that front, particularly when you consider that you had someone in Austin Searveld making his first start at left tackle. You had the surprising competition at camp for the right tackle spot between Ethan Onionwa and Philip Daniels, that Daniels ends up winning out. So he's making his first start at right tackle for Ohio State. And you've got two new running backs getting ready to deploy themselves in a pass protection capacity for the first time. I thought, okay, and on top of that all too, you have Sayan making his first start. I thought, even though I expect a certain level of composure from Sayan, I think that there's going to be enough disruption here that you would expect them to get home at least a couple times, and they never got there once. I've been confident in Sayan's ability to do well just because of the supporting cast, but that's mostly been with the offensive weapons available to him. A lot of people talk about how he was able to successfully be a little bit of a game manager yesterday. If he's getting that level of protection from this offensive line against what some people believe might be the best front in the country, you just wonder what the limit is for Ohio State's offense, given that they really didn't show a lot of their full hand yesterday. And that was something that they even admitted in the immediate aftermath of the game, was that they really scaled down what they were willing to do just because it was Sayan's first start in the first game of the season, and they didn't want to make it more complicated for him than necessary. If they're going to get that level of protection from the offensive line all season, I think that Sayan can do absolutely wonderful things with this offense, and it's going to be really interesting to see as we get into, I would say probably their next big test is going to be at Illinois in October. Penn State game is going to be at the beginning of November, and then we've got obviously Michigan at the end of the regular season. So there's still more than a few tests to come yet, but this was obviously a big result that they needed to get done in terms of getting an encouraging start off to their national title defense campaign, and that certainly happened. Yeah, I and there were certainly other surprises that I had too, but I think that was probably the one that stood out to me the most. I I guess one other thing that kind of surprised me that shouldn't have surprised me as much as it did, because this was something I talked about with Jones on the Dubcast last week, was that Jones was quietly confident that CJ Donaldson by the end of the season was going to be the guy that was clearly looking like the 1A option for Ohio State in terms of running back. He did get the first carries out of the backfield, so he did technically get the start, but we did see plenty of James Peoples along with CJ Donaldson. But even though Peoples, I think, did well in pass protection, which is probably, if you're looking for a silver lining in his performance, that would be a good place to look at in terms of how he contributed well. It was a little bit of a struggle for the rest of the afternoon, particularly compared to how effective Donaldson was running between the tackles and even using him as a pass catcher, which I think might have surprised a few people, even though they alluded on the broadcast to him kind of serving in an H-back capacity when he was at West Virginia. Did you come away feeling any concerned about Donaldson, or just what was your general thoughts about how Ohio State's running backs did in the game yesterday?
I think the run game is probably the biggest area of concern. Might be too big of a word to use. They're playing the number one team in the country, and as you mentioned, they probably have the best front seven in the sport. So Ohio State to find success on offense was already going to be a difficult thing. Obviously, they did what they needed to do to win the game. And I think when you had mentioned that Ohio State's offensive line doesn't give up a sack, that means they probably put a fair amount of attention into making sure that pass protection was in a certain spot, that they weren't going to let a guy like Colin Simmons take over the game or Anthony Hill Jr. rush off the edge and make a big play. But that does come with some of its trade offs, right? And you saw that a little bit in the run game. It didn't seem to have the creativity that maybe Ohio State fans had become accustomed to with Chip Kelly running the offense. And he's such an innovative mind, particularly in the run game. But you see the numbers of 31 carries for 89 yards and one touchdown. That's less than 3 yards per carry. That's not going to get the job done in the future against some of those opponents that you mentioned, like Illinois, like Penn State, like Michigan. But you do hope that as the offensive line continues to evolve, that it will become a more complete and holistic offensive line. I do note, though, that the one drive where Ohio State really put together what I would consider its best drive of the game, the one that was capped off by CJ Donaldson punching into the end zone, that was the drive that Ethan Onyanwa came in to play right guard for Taylor Shabola. So I don't think necessarily that this offensive line has its fullest form yet. That's not me proclaiming that Ethan Onyanwa was going to take Taylor Shabola's spot, but it is something to keep in mind as Ohio State moves forward here, that he played, I believe it was somewhere around 14 or 15 snaps that drive, where Ohio State looked really efficient, particularly on the ground. And so that's something to look for moving forward. Are they still maybe experimenting for what the best five are going to be? I don't know necessarily how Taker Shabola performed in the pass game. I have to look at the Pro Football Focus numbers there and maybe some of his snap counts. But I do think that it is interesting to note that Ethan Onyanwa, though he didn't win the right tackle competition, was given some looks yesterday. And so you could see maybe Ohio State experimenting with some newer 4 or 5 offensive linemen to have moving through the offensive line, or excuse me, moving through the line of scrimmage to create those holes for CJ Donaldson and James Peoples. I do think that Donaldson definitely surprised me by being the first running back out there against Texas, and then obviously getting 9 more carries than James Peoples is something significant.
Yeah, but again, we keep acknowledging the quality of opponent in Texas, particularly in that front seven. Now that the hardest test is over, it'll be more encouraging to see how they do against a less stiff test going forward, not only for the offensive line, but also I think the running backs will have ample opportunities for success, or at least to improve upon what you alluded to was a bit of a letdown just in terms of from an efficiency perspective with the carries that they had and the yards that they ended up yielding that yesterday. But that we'll definitely hopefully get to see a bit of an improvement against the formidable Grambling State next weekend, who I know took down was it? It was an NAIA opponent, but I'm forgetting who they
It
played
was.
last weekend. But they, I know they ended up winning 56-7. But I don't know if they'll end up having as much of a fortuitous afternoon against a now already battle-tested Buckeye team next weekend that will hopefully get more opportunities to experiment with those offensive line rotations, and will ideally get to see a lot of improvement for not only Peoples but also CJ Donaldson as well. But we've got about a week to anticipate that game coming up. Until then, thank you for tuning into the 11th Dubcast, and we hope you enjoy your Labor Day. And we will be back tomorrow to preview this week's film study coming off the Texas game with Kyle Jones. Until then, thanks for tuning in, and take care, folks.